All right, so welcome to part 3 of lecture 6 for FMGT 3224. We're just in the process of coming up with a materials purchases budget, and we have just looked at the ending inventory here, and first quarter, 20% of the grams required for the first quarter of the following year. We've got 70,000 bottles times 3 is 210 times 20% is 42,000. Okay, and then for the year, the ending inventory for the year is going to be the ending inventory for the last quarter in the year, so that will be 42,000 as well. Okay, next step is less beginning inventory. And where does the beginning inventory come from? The first one we were told there were 36,000 grams on hand. And then we know that the beginning inventory for one quarter is equal to the ending inventory of the previous quarter. So this then is going to be 54,000, 90,000, 60,000. And for the year, the beginning inventory is the beginning inventory from the first quarter, 36,000. Okay, so then that allows us to calculate the number of grams to be purchased. Grams to be purchased. So 180 plus 54 minus 36, 198. Remember, we're doing grams here. We're not going to fuss about the bottles and all that stuff up there, just the grams. So 270 plus 90 minus 54 is 306. Grams next to that. 450 plus 60 minus 90 is 420. 300 plus 42 minus 60 is 282. And 1.2 million plus 42 minus 36 is 1,206 grams. Okay. And they then ask us, at the bottom of your budget, show the amount of purchases in rubles. Okay, so in rubles, and it was 150 rubles per gram, right? So at 150 ruble per gram, so we'll just put this down here. Rubles, 29,700,000. 45,900,000. Right, and this is 198,000 times 150 gives us that, right? 420 times 150 is 63 million. 282 times 150 is 42,300,000, and for the year, 1.206 million times 150. It's not going to fit in there. We'll do it down here. 180,900,000, and that concludes the exercise. Okay, so having looked at the purchase of materials, we can now talk a bit about cash disbursements. and we figured out how much we have to pay and so on. Going back to our Royal example, right? They pay 40 cents per kilo. That's nice. But now here's where we have that lagging effect. Same sort of thing as we dealt with in the collections, right? Half a month purchases are paid for in the month of purchase, and the other half is paid in the following month. So maybe their credit terms are, net 15, for example. And so how would we go about dealing with that? Well, again, we know we've got accounts receivable here. We are, accounts payable rather. We've got April purchases of 56,000, half paid for in April, half paid for in May. May purchases of 88,600, half paid for in May and half in June. And June purchases 56,800, half paid for in June, half paid for in July. But then we add all this up, and then this is what we're expecting in terms of having to write a check in that month to pay for this stuff. And so obviously this is going to be useful for when we do the cash budget. This is going to be one of the sources of cash going out of the business, and obviously it's an important thing for us to know. Okay, enough on materials. The next thing we're going to look at then is direct labor. And we're walking through the production costs here. First we deal with materials, now labor, and then overhead. Labor is a bit simpler because there's no inventory of labor, right? But it can get a little bit tricky when you look at things like this. The company has a no layoff policy. So all employees are paid for, all full-time employees are paid for a full-time amount of work, whether they work that amount or not, and so on. So, but here, there's no overtime pay. Okay, so for our purposes, that simplifies things, but in the real world, this can get a little bit complex. So, direct labor force is going to be paid for a minimum of 1,500 hours per month. Let's look at the direct labor budget. Okay, so this comes from the production budget. It's 0.05 of an hour per item per unit produced. So here's how many direct labor hours we need. Okay, so far so good. But then we had a guaranteed minimum here, right? So we're going to pay these guys, even though they didn't work the full time, we're going to pay them full time. And so that tweaks, that adjusts these. That guy there and that guy there both get boosted to the minimum of 1,500, and so this is what we're actually going to be paying. Times the wage rate of $10 an hour, and that should give us the direct labor cost per month. And there normally isn't much of a lag in paying, just usually maybe a couple days. So often we can disregard the effect of paying the labor in, after paying the labor from 1 month in the month afterwards. It's not normally a significant factor. So, as I said, labor tends to be fairly straightforward. We're not going to do a demo problem for labor. We're just going to move on to the selling administrative expense budget. And here, this is what's interesting about this, and you'll get the same when you look at overhead, is you can break this down by its behavior, right? So in this case, we have a variable component. Maybe this is like a commission that goes to the salespeople, and a fixed component. And so as we do, as we calculate this, we have to bear that in mind. So we can look at budgeted sales, the variable component, and then the fixed component, add them together. And in this particular case, we're not necessarily looking at coming up with an income statement as much as we are looking at cash that we're having to spend. And so if some of these fixed expenses include depreciation or any other non-cash expenses, we'll then look to back them out to come out with this cash disbursements for selling and administration. So again, we have to decide where to fork in the road. If we're trying to come up with an income statement, then it's an expense, even though it's non-cash, so we'll leave it in. If we're coming up with a cash budget, which is typically the more useful document, we want to convert it to, from an accrual accounting expense into an income cash outflow, a disbursement or a cash outflow for the purposes of a cash budget. And so it will look something like this, right? So again, backing out the non-cash expenditures, this is how much cash we expect to send out the door each month of the quarter. Okay, and speaking of cash budgets, that is the next thing that we're going to do. There's no demo problem on the selling and admin budget. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I just wanted to see that the breaking it into its variable and fixed components. Cash budget, arguably the single most important of the components of the master budget. It's got 4 principal sections: receipts, cash coming in; disbursements, cash going out; the net of those include, also incorporating the beginning cash balance, which gives you the excess or deficiency for cash. And then the last section is financing. And this is basically, do we need to borrow cash to have enough cash on hand to do our thing? Now, why do I say the cash budget is the most important component of the master budget? The answer is, if you run out of cash, you die. Okay, it's just like blood in a human being. So it's very important not to run out of cash. Now, where do you get extra cash from? Well, you borrow it. You go to the bank. If you don't have enough, you go to the bank. But here's the thing. If you walk into a bank sweating and say, listen, I need $50,000 today because tomorrow I have to pay my employees, and if I don't get the cash, then they're going to quit, and I'm not going to be able to make the stuff that we're making and sell it and earn income, so please can I have the money now? Thank you very much. The bank is going to look at you and say, yeah, no. Don't think so, go away. Try the other bank down the street, good luck. Why? Well, from the bank's perspective, you got to think of it in terms of how, put yourself in their shoes. So the loan officer at the bank, maybe he has a book of, say, 100 loans out there. If he or she makes 101 loans, they're not going to throw a big party, pat him on the back, and say, hey, that's awesome, well done, and so on. But if one of his loans or her loans goes bad and doesn't get repaid, they're definitely going to hear about it. They'll get dragged in front of their boss and be reamed out. So they're naturally risk averse. They would much rather pass on an iffy client that turns out to be a good credit risk than take on an iffy client that turns out to be a bad one. So how do you convince a bank that you're a good credit risk and not a bad credit risk? Well, have a long-standing relationship with a bank. That's nice, but how do you do that when you're just starting out? The answer is you come in with a cash budget and you say, look, here's my projections. I expect to need in 4 months' time X dollars of cash to support my business needs, and I will repay it in the 2 or 3 months after that. So I need to borrow $50,000 in month 4. I'll pay you 20 grand back in month 5, 20 in month 6, and 10 in month 7, plus interest, all whatever. What does this demonstrate to the bank? Demonstrates that you have a grip on your business. It demonstrates that you can plan, and you're not in a mad panic, and you are a much better credit risk because you don't need the money now, right? You're not like if I don't get paid, I'm gonna die, right? It's a lot more rational, and bankers like that. So the cash budget for Royal. They have some requirements here. They've got a 16% open line of credit for $75,000, meaning they can borrow up to $75,000 at 16% interest. They have to keep a minimum cash balance of $30,000 in the bank. This is often something the banks require you to do. It just means you have to borrow more money from them and they collect more interest off you. They have to borrow on the first day of the month and repay on the last day of the month. Now, in reality, this doesn't work that way with lines of credit and so on, but it simplifies our calculations of interest, so we're going to stick to this rule. This company pays a cash dividend in April. They buy a bunch of equipment in May, and they have a beginning cash balance of $40,000. So we will look at Royal Company in the next part of the lecture.